يتحاصروا.
Hello, I'm a retired general. Welcome to my channel. I'm here because what you see on the news tells you what is happening. I'm going to tell you what it means, as someone who has read intelligence assessments and been inside decision-making rooms. One more thing before we begin. This channel uses its revenue to fund student scholarships. If you subscribe, like, and comment, you are directly supporting that mission. Please hit subscribe now and turn on notifications. Now let's get into it. 10 days of war, $3 billion. That is what European taxpayers have already paid in additional energy costs since the fighting started, and the meter is still running. This is not a European story. It is your story. Because when global energy markets spike, they do not stop at borders. The gas that heats your home, the fuel that moves your groceries from the warehouse to the shelf, the jet fuel that determines the price of your vacation, all of it is priced off the same global market. And that market just got hit very hard. I want to walk you through exactly what happened, what the numbers mean, and what you should be watching over the next several weeks. Because the decisions being made in Brussels and in the Gulf right now will show up in your life in ways that most coverage is not connecting for you. The numbers that matter. Let me give you the hard figures first. Since the conflict began, gas prices in Europe have risen by 50%. Oil prices are up 27%. In just 10 days, that translated into 3 billion euros in additional fossil fuel import costs for European taxpayers alone. That figure was stated directly to the European Parliament this week by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Now translate that to North America. Oil and gas are globally traded commodities. The same barrel of crude that gets priced in the Gulf is the benchmark that sets your gasoline price at the pump. The same LNG market that Europe is now competing in more aggressively is the same market that affects your home heating bill. Goldman Sachs analysts were already projecting gas prices in the range of $4.5 per gallon for American consumers if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed into its fourth week. We are not there yet, but the trajectory is set and the direction is up. For a retired couple on a fixed income, and I know many of you watching are exactly in that position, a sustained 25 to 30% increase in energy costs is not an abstraction. It is a real hit to a budget that was built on different assumptions. This is why I cover these stories, not because they are happening far away, but because they land in your driveway. Why Europe is so exposed. Here is something that most American coverage misses entirely about this conflict. Europe's energy exposure is structurally different from North America's. And understanding that difference helps you understand the scale of what is happening. Europe imports a significant share of its fossil fuels from unstable regions. They know this. Von der Leyen said it plainly this week. As long as we import a significant share of fossil fuels from unstable regions, we are vulnerable and dependent. That dependency has a price tag, and that price tag just came due. The European Union has been working for years to diversify away from that dependency. Accelerating renewables, building LNG import terminals, locking in long-term contracts with Gulf producers. Some of that work is paying off. Europe is less exposed than it was 3 years ago. But less exposed is not the same as immune. The figure that caught my attention was this. In 10 days of conflict, European gas prices rose 50%. European electricity, from renewables and nuclear, unchanged. 0% increase. That is the argument for energy independence in one data point. The countries that locked in homegrown energy sources are not paying this bill. The ones still dependent on imported fossil fuels are. North America is in a better structural position. The United States is a net energy exporter. Canada has significant domestic production. But global pricing benchmarks still affect what you pay at the pump. And the disruption to Gulf shipping chains has knock-on effects across the entire global economy that will show up in prices beyond just fuel. The D7 emergency meeting. This week, G7 energy ministers held an emergency meeting. That was followed by a video call among G7 leaders themselves. Both focused specifically on the energy implications of the conflict. The outcome was a commitment to coordinate positions on stockpile releases, to monitor supply disruptions, and to maintain pressure on Russia. And that last point is significant, and I will come back to it. The International Energy Agency has already been engaged. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve currently holds approximately 172 million barrels. A coordinated IEA release of up to 400 million barrels across 32 member nations was discussed. These are the tools available. Whether they are sufficient depends entirely on how long the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Here is the hard truth. The G7 ministers were dealing with but could not say publicly. Stockpile releases are a bridge strategy. They buy time. They cannot substitute for actual production and flow. If Hormuz stays closed for weeks rather than days, the strategic reserves get drawn down and the structural price impact becomes unavoidable. The EU Eurogroup commissioner was careful with his language this week, deliberately so. He said it was too early to speculate about specific policy implications. But he also said this: persistent targeting of shipping and energy infrastructure risks exposing the global economy to a stagflationary shock. Stagflation, higher prices combined with weaker economic growth at the same time. For retirees and near retirees, that is the worst possible economic combination. It erodes purchasing power precisely when you need stability. The Russia dimension. There is a second layer to this energy story that most coverage is treating as a separate subject, but belongs in the same analysis. Russia is profiting from this conflict. The spike in oil prices is filling Moscow's war chest at exactly the moment when Western pressure on Russian energy revenues was starting to bite. The EU Eurogroup commissioner said it directly at his press conference this week. We should keep the pressure on Russia to prevent it from filling its war chest. Not doing so would undermine Ukraine and our allies, because, and these are his words, Russia is playing on the same team as Iran. Now think about what that means in practical terms. Every dollar that the price of oil rises above its pre-conflict level is additional revenue for Moscow. Russia did not start this war, but Russia is benefiting from it in direct, measurable financial terms. And there are intelligence reports separately covered in our Day 12 analysis indicating that Russian intelligence shared targeting data with Iran that contributed to American military casualties. So you have a situation where a U.S. adversary is simultaneously profiting from a U.S.-backed war and providing targeting assistance to the forces fighting against American troops. And the administration's response when asked about it directly on national television was, "We'll take Russia's word for it." That is the full picture of the energy crisis. It is not just about your gas bill, though it is about that too. It is about a conflict whose financial consequences are flowing, in part to an adversary who has been actively working against American and allied military personnel. What you should watch: 3 things I want you to track in the coming days and weeks. First, the Strait of Hormuz. Every day it remains closed is another day the pressure builds on global energy markets. The U.S. Navy has stated it is not yet ready to escort commercial vessels through the strait. That assessment has not changed. When it changes, and it will, that will be the first real inflection point for prices. Second, IEA coordinated release decisions. The International Energy Agency's next formal assessment is imminent. Watch for that announcement. It will signal how serious the G7 governments believe the supply disruption has become, and how long they expect it to last. Third, your utility bills and gas prices locally. If the disruption extends beyond 3 weeks, expect to see the first meaningful movement in retail energy prices in North America. Former Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has put the U.S. recession probability at 65% if the Hormuz closure extends to that threshold. That is not a fringe forecast. That is a former Treasury Secretary speaking from economic modeling. The war is being fought far from here, but its financial consequences are already crossing the ocean. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I will be here to walk you through each development as it unfolds.